just hearing how their daily life from wake up to going to sleep can help us better design interventions and services. I always tell people you design a program at 8 a.m. for young people who used to waking up at 11 or 12 because they don't go to bed to 2 or 3. I know you didn't talk to them, right? And so, uh, yeah,
No, and you make a great point. I'll say um, we've done some of that. That is to say, had whether it was through public hearings, through some regional listening sessions we did. We've had some input from, as you say, the folks that we're actually trying to, in our case, making the recommendations for. And we did have, for a time, a victims advisory group. And so we've done some of that, and we can share a little bit of that with you. But um, I, I love your focus on that because I think I agree with you, that's so important. Mike, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, Justice Earls. Only, I mean, you've summarized it very, very well. I would only add that I think it might be useful. I know it would be useful if Mr. Tate might join us in our local committee meeting this month, and we can get into this in some more depth and exchange ideas and as you say, bring him up to speed on some of the things that have already taken place, but also maybe think through ways in which we might work together to expand the things that are already going on.
yeah, I think that will be very, very helpful. So I will work with Brenda to see when that meeting is and prioritize it on my calendar. Try to move some things around pretty early because I think that's a great idea. Again, I don't want to speak about things you already addressed and went over and found some solutions to. Um, we can just take those and quickly move forward with other things. But I will, unless anybody else, does anybody else have any other questions? Because I'm very long-winded sometimes, the college professor in me.
Okay, well, I don't see anyone else with any questions, so I guess let me thank you so much for joining us this morning. Welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, and we'll transition now. I'm really excited to introduce to all of you our guest here, and I want to make sure she's back on screen. Yes, see you now. Thank you. So Sue Rar has served for over 3 decades with the King County Sheriff's Department. And so Seattle is in King County, but King County is much bigger than Seattle. And there are a lot of unincorporated areas and small towns that she was responsible for. She was elected sheriff for 2 terms, but then she served nearly for a decade as director of the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission. She was also a member of the Harvard Executive Session on Policing, where she co-authored a paper addressing police culture entitled From Warriors to Guardians, Recommitting American Policing to Democratic Ideals. She served as a member of the Executive Session on Policing at the Harvard Kennedy School from 2011 to 2014. In 2015, she was on the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. She's been a consultant with NYU Law School Policing Project to Reimagining Policing, and she's the co-founder of the Center on Police Culture. So as you can hear, she has incredible wealth of experience and depth in the issue that we've been talking a lot about and trying to come to grips with, the whole question of police culture. So I am originally from Seattle, grew up there, but I am just incredibly excited to hear from you, and I'll turn it over to our guest.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. It's kind of a treat for me when I get to preach to the choir. I spend a lot of my time trying to get a message across to people who are excited to hear it. And some of my peers consider me a little bit of a heretic because I have been fairly outspoken about the role of culture in policing and the role culture plays as we continue to see some really bad behavior on the part of police officers. And one of my personal frustrations is we're putting our focus in the wrong place. We're focusing on the frontline officer when the real issue is with police leadership, and we need police leaders to also be held accountable. It's a bigger picture. So when Lori Robinson asked me to speak to this, I thought, boy, I could talk for a whole on our renewed call to action. So I'm going to try really hard to just zero two main themes about the renewed call for action. Before I do that, I want to give you a little bit of context. The task force was convened, as we all remember, after the incidents in Ferguson and several other subsequent pretty shocking incidents, the viral videos that came out. The task force report was put together very, very quickly. Those of you who have experience in federal government know these things usually take years, and this was done in months. But the task force brought together a number of experts in the field. And what we did is conduct hearings around the country and ask for input from over 100 other experts. So there was a real misunderstanding when the report was released. It became very politicized. A lot of people thought, oh, this is the Obama administration telling cops what they're supposed to do, when in fact the task force report was a compilation of recommendations from these 100+ experts that gave testimony to the task force. You can review on your own the people that were on the task force. It was a transformative experience for me because I met some people that were just incredible. Brian, well, I won't go into that, but I learned a lot from the people in the task force and from the testimony. When the report was released, again, it got mixed response. There were many people in law enforcement that embraced it and said, you know, this is great. Some people in law enforcement said they were very offended because they thought because these recommendations were put out that they were accusing law enforcement of not doing this. And so it was quite a task to say, no, we're compiling basically a list of best practices so that you have some guidelines. And I know in Washington State, and I think in many other states and local governments, use those task force recommendations as guideposts to set policy. And in Washington State, I know in particular, they formed the foundation for a whole series of changes in state law. So, you know, that was the good side of it. The bad side of it, of course, because it was politicized, a lot of law enforcement leaders wouldn't even read it. I was asked to speak at a conference for the FBI National Academy group in Arizona. And I learned the day that I got there to speak that a number of members had boycotted the conference because they were so offended that I was asked to come and present the task force recommendations. And that was quite a shock to me. I didn't really understand the depth of the political polarization that had already taken hold of the country. But what was very reassuring is those that did attend the conference, as we talked through what the recommendations were, the skeptics and the people who said they didn't support it changed their minds because they realized what the recommendations were. One of the sad realities of those recommendations, and many of us in the task force lamented about this, is there wasn't much new in those recommendations that had not already been raised in the Kerner Commission report. And for each of you in the task force, if you're not familiar with the Kerner Commission report, I strongly recommend that you get a copy of it or get a summary of it, because the Kerner Commission did extraordinary work exposing what the drivers of crime and violence were in the late 60s. You know, context, President Johnson put the commission together to try and find out why was the country exploding. You know, at the time it was referred to race riots. I think in hindsight, we're looking at it more as a rebellion. But the Kerner Commission provided very insightful answers to what is happening. And the essence of what the Kerner Commission said is we've created criminogenic conditions in communities. And through, you know, income, inequality across the whole spectrum of public institutions. But we've created these conditions, and rather than come in and address and try to remedy these terrible conditions that we've created in ghettos and barrios and other under-resourced communities, we bring the police in to try and bring order to a situation that is exploding. And here we are nearly 50 years later. And I think one of the things that the task force members recognized is there is some folly at only focusing on what police need to do to change. Certainly police need to improve. I won't argue with that for a minute. But even if we create a much better police force, that doesn't fix the situation in the community. And again, I know I'm preaching to the choir here. Mr. Tate, I think, explained very clearly, a kid is raised in a war zone and goes to juvenile hall for a while, and we put him back in the war zone and expect that somehow he's going to magically change because he was punished, which is just nuts. But that's what we keep doing. So after the task force report came out, that things seemed to calm down across the country. Like everything else, there's a big explosion, flurry of activity, and then it sort of receded. And I think when the George Floyd murder happened, I think that reignited so much of the anger and the angst that had been simmering below the surface that we saw it explode. Certainly the pandemic and the complete unraveling of social services during that time contributed to it. But for many of us on the task force, we still stay in touch, and we talked. And Connie Rice, who was a task force member, she and I were on the phone weekly or a couple of times a week about we got to do something here. Now it's interesting. Connie and I teamed up with the person who organized the task or helped manage the task force, Jim Koppel. He runs a consulting group that brings people together to debate and solve problems. And Connie and I reached out to Jim and said, we got to do something. This report came out 5 years ago, and here we are in 2020, and it doesn't seem like things have gotten much better. Connie and I and Jim were able to bring together a summit of people who have interest in improving public safety, and that included people like General Stanley McChrystal, law enforcement leaders, Chuck Ramsey. Those of you in law enforcement know Chuck is sort of like the lion of law enforcement, and a very broad, diverse group of social scientists, researchers, and whatnot, to talk about what could we possibly do. And we came up with a series of recommendations. About that time, Lori Robinson and Chuck Ramsey, the conveners of the task force, reached out to us and said, what if we were to reconvene and put out a new call for action to remind people that we have guidelines? The bottom line is, I think we know what to do to make policing more effective. We lack the political will to do it. And it's not that we don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. We've got the wheel. But as a society, we haven't been willing to invest in what it's going to take to make that wheel work better. So the task force reconvened virtually, of course. The whole world now knows how to do virtual convenings. And the task force took the recommendations from this summit group. They added a lot of information and put out a renewed call for action. And it's not clear to me, did you all get a copy of that renewed call for action? I'm not sure how that's been distributed.
I don't think it's been sent to the task force members.
Okay, I will see if I can do that, because it's a lengthy report. The guts of the report, there's about 10 pages that include recommendations about what we can do now in 2023 to make things, to improve public safety and improve policing. The overarching themes coming out of those recommendations are two things. Number one, this has to be a multidisciplined, all hands on deck, a Marshall Plan, if you will, for the United States. That's what the Kerner Commission talked about. And we are not going to make progress if we keep looking at public safety as a problem that's going to be fixed by the police. We're putting reasonable people in an unreasonable situation, and then they're behaving unreasonably, and we think it's, you know, obviously there is individual responsibility, but we're also setting law enforcement up for failure. So one of the main themes of the report is, as a government, as a society, we have to start investing in the services that are necessary. Mr. Tate talked a little bit about some of the different programs. Those kind of programs have to be fully funded. We talked about at NYU, alternative call handling. You know, we should have these other professionals respond to 911 calls. And that sounds great on paper, but if you don't fund the organizations that are going to be the alternative call handlers, it's going to fail. And I know in Seattle, we're struggling with that a little bit because we're talking about diverting calls to other entities, but those entities don't have the resources to respond either. And, you know, my personal opinion is, over time, you know, it's always devolved to the cops, because even though policing is expensive, it's cheaper than fully funding all of the community support needs that are necessary to have a safe community. So again, one major theme, we need to take a holistic approach to public safety and not expect that the cops are going to come in and fix it themselves. For the cops, we came to the conclusion, and this is my personal belief, we can't fix policing until we fix the culture. And I think one of the fundamental problems in police culture is we have created this myth around policing that we're engaged in this noble battle between good and evil, and that there's a war, and we're bringing in police officers to fight this noble battle between good and evil. And from my perspective, that looks to me like a diversion from, let's not talk about all of these other things that contribute to public disorder, to crime and disorder, to violence. Let's blame individual moral failings. If we look at our crime problem in the United States as there's just a whole bunch of people who are immoral, then we can let ourselves off the hook for improving the conditions in communities that breed violence and despair and eventually crime. So several of us in the task force are doing work in the area of trying to relook at police culture, try to convince law enforcement leaders not to put themselves in the position of being used by local government to come in and fix a problem that is not of it's not the creation of the police. Crime is not, in my opinion, is not impacted as much by the police as it is by the social safety net. And again, I know you all know that. But politically, it's very popular for politicians. You go back to Richard Nixon, I think, was the first one that really recognized the rally cry of, you know, tough on crime and fighting crime as very politically popular. And so what I'm trying to do when I work with law enforcement leaders is to say, stand up, don't take the bait, don't be used as a political tool. Stand up and say, you know, yes, I will send my police officers to respond to crime, but I'm not going to say, give me 100 more cops so that I can be more effective in suppressing the problem. I want law enforcement leaders to stand up and say, this is a partnership, and we need to put more funding into these programs that are going to help improve conditions in communities. I think despite all of the, you know, angst right now over policing, I think most police leaders are fairly well trusted in their communities. And if those police leaders were the ones to stand up and say, I'm not playing this game anymore. This is not a battle between good and evil. This is not a situation where we need a bigger hammer. If the police chiefs and sheriffs said, come on, everybody, let's be honest about what the problems that we've created and let's work together to solve them, I think that would just shift the momentum a little bit. And it would certainly help those, especially young new cops on the front line, who are being fed this BS myth about you're fighting a battle between good and evil. And, you know, you're the thin blue line between chaos and order. that does not help cops. I think that's one of the most detrimental things a police leader can do. So I'm gonna stop talking at this point, because I would really prefer to have a conversation and get questions or feedback from you, and just gonna take it from there.
Well, thank you so much. And I already have a lot of questions, but I know that some of our task force members do as well. And I might even start calling on folks that I know are here. But please, if you have a question, just unmute and ask.
Justice Earl, I know I'm not on that task, but can I ask a question?
Please do. Go right ahead.
Or maybe make an observation. When you brought up the Kerner Commission, I had to get back on the camera because when I started my doctoral studies, it was the first thing that a committee member told me to look at. And as I was reading it, you could just copy and paste it until today.
That's
Make
right.
some changes to what's maybe appropriate for our times, and we wouldn't use Negro and some other things.
Right.
But if you just read the summary, I think, and I would add that I think the current way and historical way of policing has been detrimental to the mental, the physical, and the family health of law enforcement officers,
Right.
as well as the people that they're policing. And one of the biggest reasons I became a social worker is to become a clinician to help police officers. And so I had to recognize that due to those social failures in the environment, they're also being exposed to a lot of the violence, the death, and the trauma. And we equally don't put enough support and effort, we in whole of America, in addressing their mental health and wellness needs, as well as fully fund the things that are needed for their wellness as well. And I think if we want to have community safety, I always ask people, do you want your officers showing up mentally well sometimes or all the time, right? And I remember responding to 911 calls not feeling well mentally sometimes, physically probably all the time. And there was not a lot of effort put on there. So I think one way that we can bring law enforcement, CBI, and community together is talking about joint healing and wellness together. So we start to see each other as human beings instead of that us versus them. Because right now that's what it is. And in the middle of the night on a shift as a police officer, when you respond in 5 or 6 different shootings, it's kind of hard for you not to develop that mentality without some intentional connection to the communities in which you work. So,
Could not agree with you more.
Hello, how you doing? My name is Kerwin Pittman, and so I just want to pick your brain real quick and just ask your thoughts and perspective on after 2020, the George Floyd incidents and kind of individual protests, and why do we see an uptick in law enforcement killing of citizens? I know 2022 is like one of the deadliest years on record of law enforcement killings of citizens. Just want to know your thoughts on that.
Well, I think that I think right now we're at a place where we have we're so divided, and I think there's always been a little bit of an us against them culture built into policing, kind of like preparing soldiers for war. You dehumanize the other side so that you can do the things that you have to do, and I think the escalation of some community members being very critical of police, I think that escalates the level of fear and paranoia by police officers. I think that's part of it. The other part that we cannot ignore is the gun culture in this country. In my opinion, it's just out of control. When I talk to peers from other countries, they just shake their head and can't imagine how we do policing in this country when there's more guns than people. So law enforcement in the United States is dangerous. You cannot escape that reality of the danger there. And you pick up the newspaper, gosh, it seems like every day and there's a mass shooting. And so I think the fear on the part of police may cause them to be more concerned about their safety When I think there are many people that believe that the disproportionate killing of Black people, brown people, is because of personal bias or racial bias, unconscious bias. That may be, and likely is, one element, but it's much more complicated than that. And I think as our society continues to become more divided, and the flames of racial animosity continue to be fanned, I think all of those things impact that problem. I'm kind of rambling. I apologize for that. Does that address a little bit of what you're asking? I could go deeper or ask me more.
No, that's perfect. You hit it right on the head. And and one more follow-up question. So how do you think we move forward from both sides? And I'm sorry, I ain't trying to take up all the time.
Oh, that's not a problem at all. I think the different reform groups that I work with, we are coming to the conclusion that we need to start focusing our efforts differently. Typically we focus on law enforcement. We go to law enforcement leaders. I've worked with a team to develop a leadership training program that I think is really good, but it's not going to fix the real problem. And so we're looking at spending more time educating elected leaders, government leaders outside of law enforcement. So the mayor, city council members, county executives, the people that are the boss of the police, we want to put more efforts into educating them about what they can do to better support their police department and better hold their police departments accountable. What are the options? Fighting crime and going after law and order is not the only way to improve public safety. So it's difficult because anybody in politics knows that tough on crime wins elections. And so when you go to a politician, an elected person, and say, hey, don't pound the table about tough on crime, pound the table about better community support, that's not very popular. And so we're trying to figure out ways to help elected leaders recognize and learn about better ways of improving public safety besides the constant just tough on crime, because it's more complicated.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Good morning. Sheriff Clarence Burkhead, Durham County. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. I absolutely cannot disagree with anything that you've said. One thing that really struck me as a politician and as a career law enforcement is you mentioned lack of political will. And I think that's where we need to start the conversation, because we, law enforcement, we're not the answer. So I struggle with how many more bodies, how many more young lives have to be lost, how many more mass shootings. This year, we're already on a record-setting pace. And we practitioners are doing everything we can possibly do. How do we muster up enough political will to have this paradigm shift and focus on the root causes? And this is the work that we do in TREC, and TREC is doing great stuff. North Carolina, in Durham County, I'll give a shout out for my county. We're doing great things. We have so many resources, but they're not getting to the people that really need them. And those individuals who are at risk, who are on the margins, we just haven't been able to reach. And then you mentioned guns, and I'll stop talking. That conversation just falls dead the moment you say gun reform, responsible ownership, sensible gun legislation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's making my head swell. So thank you for doing what you do. And I'd really like to, and the last point you just made was start talking to the politicians, the mayors, the city managers, county managers, because even in Durham, as progressive and forward thinking as we are, and you can put your own definition behind that, they don't want to fund police. I struggle with budget requests every single year. And I tell them everything we do at the Durham County Sheriff's Office is designed to save lives. We're not increasing our law enforcement, we're increasing our social outreach
Right.
and mentorship. And how do we reach our elementary school kids? But anyway,
Yeah, yeah.
you're,
Well,
you're spot on. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, you make a good point, Sheriff. And my dream is we get law enforcement leaders. I think the only way to overcome the momentum of the political popularity of tough on crime as the only answer is for law enforcement leaders to stand up and say, tough on crime alone is not going to make our community safer. It is an element, but these other things have to happen as well. And because tough on crime is so politically popular, I really think the only effective counter voice is respected law enforcement leaders to stand up and speak out against it. I'll send a link to, there's a great article that was written by Ta-Nehisi Coates, published in The Atlantic in 2015, where he talks about the myth of police reform. And it's one of the best pieces I've ever read about police reform. And it's something I think that can be used with elected leaders to say, look at the ridiculous position we've put ourselves in. So thank you for your feedback.
Sergeant Garten, I see you have your hand up. Do you want to go next?
Hey, good morning.
We still have 10 minutes for this conversation, so take your time.
All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
I want to circle back to Carolyn's question and just add a police officer's perspective to it as well. First of all, in this very public forum here, I'm going to take a little bit of exception to calling it an uptick in the killing of citizens, because anytime we have a justified selection and application of the appropriate level of force to defend oneself or a third person from what they reasonably believe to be the use of deadly force on someone else, we have to address the behavior as well, right? And so in 2020, 21, 22, we find that folks are way more willing now to be aggressive behavior toward or produce aggressive behavior toward law enforcement officers. And so to just address or to just say that this uptick, as it was referred to, is as a result of law enforcement officers using force more, I think is very unfair without addressing the fact that it's because the behavior has presented itself more. And there are some situations where deadly force is the only option. And so as a practitioner in the field and a trainer and on the task force, I find it very hard to sit here and not have the voice for those folks who are out there, just ordinary people trying to do a very extraordinary job in a very difficult time. And I think it's unfair to label their selection and application of force as an uptick. And so to circle back to one of the things that I think we are all dancing around is parenting. And this hit me the other night on my third shooting call where these young folks were running around. And when I was first on patrol, I've been at the city now for 21 years. It was unheard of to go to a shots fired into a residence call. And now it happens 3 or 4 times a shift per shift. And these young folks are running around with plenty of guns with this inability to understand the consequences of firing bullets into someone's house. And we catch them. We take them out of stolen cars, we take drugs off of them, we take guns off of them, and the law requires that we turn them over to their parents. And when the parents get there, they could care less. So I think in order to truly address this issue, we're gonna have to start, we talk about programs all the time, but I wanna make sure that there's a focus in our programming on parenting, because we are failing these young folks when we forget to address their parents. Yes, we need to address their mental health. Yes, we need to address their behavior. But the parenting issue is becoming what, in my opinion, the number one cause. And I say that because I see it. I see parents refusing to come and get their kids. I see parents not caring what their behavior is. And when you take a child, and I call them a child, they're 13 and 14 years old. When you take them out of a stolen car 2 and 3 times a night, that's a parenting issue. Uh, and it just didn't start that night either. And so in any program designed to address, especially this youth violence, there's gonna have to be some focusing on parenting. And again, I will agree that it's not a sole police problem. And it's not our issue solely. We are the ones left to deal with it more often than not. Same with mental health. We are the ones left to deal with it more often than not. When the resources start to get reduced, the folks aren't going away, the consumers aren't going away. So someone has to stay out there and do the job. I'm also going to go and take this opportunity to say there are a number of issues that we have addressed here, but one of the things that I think we really have maybe not really touched on is the parenting issue, and I think we've really got to get some focus on that. And so, to answer your question, people are just more willing to misbehave some at this time too, right? And so I think there's a combination, and so until we address the whole problem and not just looking at law enforcement, but the entirety of the family breakdown and the structure, you know, we're going to continue to see this uptick, and especially with the youth, because you know, for lack of a better explanation, there's really no consequences to their poor decision making at this point, and that, I think that has become very problematic in our society.
Sergeant Martin or Gardner, I really appreciate you bringing your perspective up, because I think it's very easy for us to sit in a nice, quiet, you know, office space, not out on the street. And I absolutely recognize what you're saying. I was the gang unit commander for 3 years in the Seattle metropolitan area in the late 80s, early 90s, and it was shocking and eye-opening to me when I got to know these gang-involved kids on a personal level. And I agree with you that parenting is a huge issue. What I have learned over the years is, you know, that phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. I recognized right away that the parents, we have parents that are not equipped to be parents, and that don't have the support, the resources, the education. So I, like everything else, I think it's deeper and more complicated. We could, I think if we improve the social service net, that will have a positive impact on parenting. Um, I've shared your experience taking kids home to their parents, and I could see right away the parents were a huge contributing factor. Don't lose sight of, and this is easy to do when you're working the street. You only see the bad kids. There's a lot of kids that are doing better now than they did back in the late 70s, early 80s when I was starting working the street. So I don't know. We got to focus on what we can control, and I think we can control the institutions and the services that support better parenting and more accountability.
And Sergeant Gardner, just I appreciate your perspective, and by no means, you know, it was no slight towards law enforcement. To call it an uptick, I was just, you know, calling it what it was, and definitely wanted her perspective. On it. And for those who don't know, me and Sergeant Gardner been on the same committees since the task force has kind of been convened, and me and this brother here has, you know, he shaped my perspective on a lot of different things. He showed me a lot of different side of a lot of different things, and I'm pretty sure, you know, the same for me as well. And so, it's, you know, we have these type of discussions all the time.
I think it's Lieutenant Garten. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Lieutenant
Oh,
Gardner.
my bad. We're just, you know, you have been with us from the beginning, for which we are grateful. Did I see, Director Tate, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I'll make this short. The first placement I got doing my master's degree was as a high school social worker. And so I left as a military criminal investigator focused on domestic violence and child crimes in a place where social safety net is there, right? The military has its best social safety net as you can have, but the trauma wasn't addressed. So child deaths, and child abuse and all those things were still there. But the first thing I learned in transitioning from law enforcement to social work was the parents came to see me. And the first thing I realized is they were my age. And what I mean by that is when we say that the parents have to be held more accountable and do X, Y, and Z, we have to realize that I was born in '85 in Chicago in the crack epidemic, and I didn't have any of the social supports and things that I needed as well. So the parents are just as traumatized as the children. The parents are oftentimes just as stressed as the children. And so when we say have them be better parents, or that they should make better decisions, I just reframe that a little bit and say, uh, part of what you said, which is we need to develop more programs, strategies, whole of community support for those individuals who are often, due to socio and economic issues, not in a position to be the best. They're being the best parent that they can. If the child is out at 2 a.m., I ask when you take them home. If the parent says stay here and the child doesn't listen, what is the next step? Because many of the children are not listening and the parents are trying. But if you go to the schools and you meet with the school counselors and social workers, they meet with the parents all the time, and the parents are literally at their wits' end and also being traumatized by the same violence that is going around. So I 100% agree that we need better community supports for those families that are at the highest risk. I also think a more holistic view is saying if we know that these young people are at higher risk and we know which ones family don't have the current capacity to support their safety and decision making needs, what are we doing around all day, all night programming, boarding, alternatives to incarceration? Because we know if we continue to send them back into those environments, the same behavior has to happen, right? What choice are they having? And I will lastly say this, I'm very passionate about this. When shooting happened in my neighborhood, nobody was coming to save us. I had to operate the next day in that same lived environment. If my cousin or brother is in a gang and they get into a conflict, right, I'm still there. Who is there to come and protect me and support me? And so, Lieutenant, oftentimes you're meeting them in the middle of the night and they're doing reckless behavior, and you process them and you take them back home. And you probably have done this, but go in the home if they allow you to go in, or speak more in detail with the parent about what support and services they may need. And there's a racial lens to this, and I'll end by this. We talked about more policing and policing strategies and tougher on crime being politically um, more politically supported. But it's tough on crime for who and what neighborhoods, because that tough on crime is not applied equally across the socioeconomic and racial communities. And so tough on crime is politically advantageous to certain communities, not to all. And I don't want to lose focus of that fact, given the name and the charge of this organization.
This has been an incredibly rich discussion. I do want to ask my question. And if anyone else has we actually have a little wiggle room because we have no public comment session today. So if anyone else has a question they want to get in before we move on, please do. But so my question is, the perspective, the big picture perspective you've given us is certainly one that we heard from some of the folks. So our task force has been divided in 6 months to make recommendations and then the rest of the time to implement them. So we are very much in the implementation stage. So like we want to know, like, how do we get it done? And obviously we're a body, appointed by the governor, but we have no, like, we don't get to pass laws, right?
Right.
We don't get to fund local programs. So we're engaged. So you understand kind of the position that we as a task force have. People came to our public hearings and said, you're not going to solve the problem of racial disparities in the criminal justice system as a whole. So not only policing, but every element of the criminal justice system, that's in our purview. You're not going to solve the problem of racial disparities through any of the reform you're talking about, that it is all the socioeconomic determinants that you identified. It's discrimination in housing, in employment, in healthcare, and education, right? And so they would say, solve those problems for us.
Yeah.
But that is a positive because our task force was created because people were in the streets throughout community, I think we kind of forget this, but throughout communities, I don't know, 100 different communities in North Carolina, right? Just in our state, people on the streets saying, we cannot tolerate this any longer. But they were not saying fix housing, fix education, right? They were saying fix the police and the court system. So part of getting, it seems to me part of getting, whether it's local electeds, whether it's police leadership, part of getting them to make the shift to understand that it's the social network generally is also the people who've been demonstrating and making the demand for change. But my question for you is, do you have a model for us, right? Do you, through your work with folks around the country, is there some place where you would say, look at what they're doing, they've had an impact?
Oh boy, that's a great question. I think some places I could point you to. NYU Policing Project has come up. They have a website. I'll get you a link and send it to the group, where they're talking about some alternatives, alternative strategies for public safety. And it's a place to start. There's another layer to this problem that we didn't really talk about that also has to be addressed, and that is the system itself, the criminal justice system. We have this mythology in policing that we were built around Sir Robert Peel's principles, Peelian principles, and all that. And Sir Robert Peel, yes, he had a philosophy, and that was a factor, but we have to look at the real history of the United States and how the system was built. And the system was constructed initially, early on, going back to slave patrols. Nobody likes to hear that, but the system was designed to ensnare people and keep them under the control of the state for as long as possible. Now, people coming into law enforcement in this day and age, most of them don't know that history, don't know how the system was created. And so we have to address that as well, because you look at the young cop on the street. I remember like it was yesterday, 43 years ago, when I started as a patrol officer, thinking that my goal was to make as many arrests as I possibly could and rack up as many tickets and fines, thinking that was going to fix the problem, not understanding that once I get that person into the system, it just snowballs and the fines and fees add up and all of that. So I think we have to add that to the conversation, is addressing the structural issues in the criminal justice system as well. So I guess, again, going back to a real specific recommendation, the NYU Policing Project has some very, very good suggestions. I think addressing the police officers' education, I think, is really, really important, because so much of what police do is discretionary, and we want them to make good decisions, and they can make better decisions if they understand the entire system and how it works. And I think most cops I know that I've worked with over the years are trying to do the right thing, and they are trying to help the community, and they are trying to improve public safety. And I think we need to give them better tools to do that. And I think some of the recommendations out of NYU are very helpful. There's also a very successful program that's been going on in LA. It's the community. Oh gosh, I'm going to get the. I'll send a link to this as well. And this is a project that Connie Rice worked on with LAPD. And what this program did is they went into some of the most troubled communities with projects with just horrendous crime rates, and they made the decision to shift the paradigm from coming in from the outside and imposing order on the community to bringing the community to the table and saying, we're going to work together on this. And they had community coalitions that included gang leaders, social service workers, educators. And for 10 years, that project has been going on. It's been evaluated twice now, most recently by UCLA, and they have shown extraordinary success. So I'm sorry, I'm having a a vapor lock in my brain. I can't remember the title of the program, but that's a really, really good model to be used, and I think it would be beneficial. It's not big. It's not. It doesn't get beyond the police department, though. I have to say, it doesn't give recommendations about the role of state government or that, but it's very locally focused.
Great. Does anyone else have a last question they want to make sure they get in?
I do, if I may, just briefly. Thank you, Sheriff, for taking the time to spend with us today and to give us some insight from where you sit, from a former committee member. And I definitely appreciate your value and your comments. Have you seen any programs out there in your experience where respect of community has come back, where people actually value where they live? Because I think we're missing that piece. As a retired police chief, and in this new role as a secretary, when I was out there interacting with people, when a crime happened in that respective community, they didn't have value of where they actually live. I was always taught what you permit is what you promote. If you permit bad behavior, you're gonna, promote bad behavior.
Yeah.
So are there models out there of, police departments and the social action groups actually coming together to see some common good in what we can do to reduce the fear within communities?
Yeah.
Because I really think that's also part of the problem. Not only parenting, not only the access to firearms, which is out of this world, but how do we bring back the sense of community? I grew up in rural North Carolina in a peanut field and a cotton field and soybean fields, but there was a sense of value in my community. When I saw a strange car go down the street, it wasn't the fact that I was profiling that car, but it was the fact that I had a sense of value in the community. So are you aware of any programs out there that can help bridge that gap with the sense of value?
Yeah.
Because people see crime in their community right in front of them, and law enforcement gets there and they haven't seen anything, but everybody wants to blame law enforcement about trying to solve that when you don't even have that value within your own community. And is it the fear with law enforcement? Is it the rhetoric that they're listening to? I just don't know. So I'm just asking for some guidance, and I'm sorry to ramble on.
Oh, no, not at all. I think what you're bringing up is so important, and that's, community values and, the pro-social pressure on people. It's so much more interesting to study why people obey the law as opposed to why they break it. And if we can focus so much more on what can we do to promote pro-social behavior, I think we have more success. And it finally came to me, the Community Safety Partnership is the program in LA that I think that you'll find a lot of what you're seeking in that program, because it addresses how do you build pride in community, because when you've created a ghetto and somebody lives in just a rundown, poorly supported community, it's hard to generate pride when your local government and the education system, everything isn't treating the community as if there's any pride in the community. So this Community Safety Partnership program, again, it's a really good model for building that sense of community. This is our community. We want it to be safe. And, we want people to obey the law because they have pride in the community and they feel a connection and responsibility to their neighbors. That's the only comprehensive program that I know of. I think that there are thousands of communities around the nation that have that cohesion and the sense of pride, that we just don't hear about them because they don't have horrible crime problems. But I think if you're looking for a model, the Community Safety Partnership is a really good model. It starts with listening to the community and giving community a sense of control about how their community is going to be protected. It's the antidote for coming in from the outside and imposing order. I think that's the most counterproductive way to improve public safety. And I'm afraid in our society, in many arenas, we've done that. We've outsourced responsibility for building a sense of pride. And anyway, I think I'll send you the link to the UCLA report on that program. I think it'll be really helpful.
Anyone else? Wonderful. Well, I hope we haven't held you too long, but thank you so much for all of your work, for taking the time to join us and engage with us in the discussion. We will look forward to the links and materials you're going to share with us, and just enormously grateful to you for being with us this morning.
Well, thank you for having me. I always gain so much more than I give in a conversation like this, and I really have so much respect for all of you that are putting the time and effort into this and sharing your honest ideas and honest perspectives about the issues that you're grappling with. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Justice Earls.
Yes.
Yeah, if I may, Sheriff, I'd love to connect with you offline sometime. If you have your contact information, would that be appropriate? That'd be okay.
Absolutely, I would love that. It's always heartwarming to me, I have to say, to talk to a sheriff that shares your perspective. The Office of Sheriff has been hijacked by some folks recently. It is not doing us any favors. Because I think, my God, if the sheriffs were to band together in a positive way, because I felt like when I was sheriff as an elected leader, I had so much freedom and so much ability to influence things. And if our sheriffs would grab onto that, we could be a real force for positive change.
Very good. I totally agree. Thank you. I'll reach out.
Thank you.
And we are so fortunate to have some good ones. So
yes, exactly.
A huge round of applause for you virtually. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And so now I'm turning to April Dawson, Dean Dawson, who we have a Fulbright scholar with us, and I'll let April Dawson introduce her.
Thank you, Justice Earls, and good morning, everyone. We have joining us all the way from Sheffield, England, Detective Chief Inspector Anila Khalil Khan. She is the recipient of the Fulbright Stephen Lawrence Scholar Award, and she's joining us at North Carolina Central University from July 1 through August 13th. Detective Chief Inspector Khalil Khan has over 20 years of law enforcement experience. She has performed within a variety of areas, including criminal investigations, major criminal incidents, protecting vulnerable persons, and serious and organized covert investigations. While in the US, she's researching race and policing and innovative ideas in broad areas such as, but not exclusively, law enforcement, public health, and community engagement. She has already spent time in and met with members of law enforcement and the community in Washington, D.C. and Denver, Colorado. Since having been here in North Carolina, she's met with law enforcement and community members in Apex, Wake County, Pitt County, and Durham County. And with that, I will turn it over to Detective Chief Inspector Khalil Khan.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you ever so much for having me at this meeting. April's mentioned pretty much my bio. What I found interesting in policing in the US compared to policing in the UK, I'm not sure if many of you are aware, but I'll just cover off how policing is conducted in the UK. So in the UK, we are a centralised police force. The country is split into 43 regionalised police forces within England and Wales. Each force has the autonomy to comply with central government standard but there's an oversight from the national perspective and the standardisation of certain codes of conduct. So basically, each force is governed by the government centrally. There's a National Police Chiefs Council who sets sort of the criteria and expectations. Now, slightly different to the US, obviously with so many different law enforcement agencies, all with their own jurisdictions and often with their own law enforcement and law legislation. However, that's not the same in the UK. It's very, so basically I have jurisdiction in the north of England, to the south, to wherever I go in the UK, which is obviously so much different. With that, the government have regular inspections for each police force. So it's the Her Majesty's, or His Majesty's, sorry, inspectorate who come and review the force and the department and see what standard they're working to and essentially grade them on if they're meeting expectations, etc., or if there's redeemable work to be conducted. Those inspections are conducted yearly, and the process slightly changed now. But that inspection really governs the police force and making sure that everyone is performing to the national standards and that we are national government expectations. And if they're not, obviously that force then has to do some remedial work to develop that. Some really good aspects of the centralisation format compared to the US in as much as if the government set a task force, so for example, there's a couple of task force running at the moment. One's concentrates on violence against women and girls. A second one is the race action plan. Both action plans or task force are run nationally with a small team, but each force will adopt that action plan and address the issues within their force. So, for example, the National Race Action Plan is a way that the government and the National Police Council chiefs realise that we, as a police force in the UK, there have been some failings, in particular to the Black community. We haven't adhered to what we should have, what our code of conducts are, and we haven't investigated correctly. And therefore, that's created a distrust between the community and the police. So what the Race Action Plan is doing is trying to address those issues and trying to make sure that each force is working towards the action plan to overcome the barriers and overcome the issues that we've had. And it's similar, the violence against women and girls, it's how, as a nation, we can support women and girls who have been subject to sexual harassment, domestic abuse, etc., and making sure that the women have a voice as well. Obviously, that's that bore from sort of some certain incidents that occurred back in the UK. So that's a national perspective. So it's slightly different to the US, whereas obviously you guys have North Carolina and how you're working with the communities, how you're working with law enforcement to overcome those barriers and making sure that you're all on the same page. We do that on a national perspective, which I know it could be slightly different and difficult in the US with it being so large. Quite interesting, listening to the sheriff earlier and mentioning the gun violence. Yes, it's predominant over here in America. I'm not going to say that we do have firearms and gun violence in the UK, and certainly over the past years, we have seen a massive increase in violence related to firearms. Now, the difference we have in the UK is it's illegal to own a firearm. Certain people can, as in if you're registered, if you're a farmer, if you're dealing or exchanging firearms in a business premises, but no one is legally allowed unless they go through the criteria. And obviously, as law enforcement and police officers, we don't carry firearms. Everyone's not issued with a firearm. It's only certain teams within the police force who carry a firearm. So the gun violence is not just the US, it's becoming predominant over there as well, unfortunately. So that's a bit of a sort of background of how policing is conducted, some recent action plans that we have ongoing in the UK, all of which is going in the right direction. And I think, as I keep mentioning,
Unfortunately, I think we're having some connectivity issues, Justice Earl.
Yeah, I don't know that it's on our end.
It's, I think we were working on the technology a little bit yesterday, and so it looks like it's gotten the best of us. So we might need to move forward in the program, but
Well, let me just thank you for
Your response.
activity issue.
now it looks like we've lost.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Okay, I think you're back. You might want to turn off your video. That might help. That might help. Detective Chief Inspector, can you hear us? Detective Chief Inspector,
You're intermittent, Professor, so I'm not too sure if there's a question or.
Okay. What we might need to do is move on in the program. And if you can mute, thank you. But Justice Earls, you were going to say a little bit.
Well, yeah, so I just wanted to thank you for, bringing her to us. And if she has any insights from the work she's doing, I mean, it's already impressive, the places she's been in North Carolina, the folks she's talked to. If there's information she has that would be helpful for us, just welcome receiving that in whatever way. And if we can help with her work in any way, just let us know. But thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you and Secretary Buffalo for allowing her to just say a few words. I think this was a special meeting for her to participate in. As you mentioned, the discussion thus far has been just really robust. And I'll connect with her when I get back to North Carolina, and we'll be happy to share any information that she thinks might be helpful for the task force. So thank you.
And of course, all of our meetings are public. And so if she wants to attend any of the committee meetings, let us know. And with that, I want to move us to getting our committee reports, because I'm just really excited to hear the updates on the work everyone's been doing. And we're going to start with the executive committee, and that's Lieutenant Garden.
Hey, good morning again, everyone. The executive committee did not meet last week because it was the meeting was going to be in or last month it was going to be in conflict with something else the task force had going on. However, we have been in a discussion about a prior presentation that we had in reference to restorative justice. I will tell you, for the folks who are on the meeting right now that were at that meeting, you can back me up on this when it's your turn to speak. But for the folks who were not there, I will say one of the probably the most heart-changing, eye-changing, mind-changing presentations that I've had as a member of the task force as it related to restorative justice. And it really was a mind-opening experience for me, because I hadn't really taken that perspective of victim, offender coming together and the justice being restored between the two parties, right? As a law enforcement officer, we tend to find the crime, investigate the crime, make an arrest, and move on, not really giving a lot of thought to victims and what it is they need after their arrest has been made, because we sometimes think, well, that's all they want is for that person to be punished, and to hear that story, and for you all that were not there. It was a lady that had been raped and many years removed. She spoke about how it affected her life and how it affected everything that she did from that moment on. And then she talked about the buildup and the workup to the courage that allowed her to sit in a room with her offender and answer questions and ask questions and to get some true closure as it related to that incident. And I had never given it a whole lot of thought, but I will say this: it moved us enough that my committee has committed itself to partnering with one of the other committees on coming up with a resolution for a restorative justice type recommendation, a little more in depth than the one that's already on the book now. And so in an effort to make sure we cover all our bases, don't step on anybody's toes, we're going to do the background, the research on the other recommendations, and then we will come back before the entire committee and ask you to vote on it at that point in time. But other than that, that's pretty much all we got, unless anybody has some questions for me.
Okay, I'm not seeing or hearing any questions. Thank you for that report, and thank you for the work. I agree. It was a really powerful presentation. So that brings us to the Judicial Committee, and Nisha Williams, will you give that report?
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Nisha Williams. I am the legal director at the North Carolina Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and I also serve as the co-chair of the Judicial Committee. Today, I wanted to just update you all on what we've been doing this past quarter. In June, our committee heard some remarks from Brian Scott, who is the executive director of Our Journey, who's doing a lot of work in the reentry movement of formerly incarcerated folks coming back into civilian life. Also, last month, we had a presentation from Lindsay Spain, who gave us great information on the School Justice Partnership. And she gave us an overview of the work that's being done. And our committee is currently reviewing the possibility of creating a smaller subgroup that Judge Parker has agreed to take the lead on, so that we'll be able to look into more in depth on what we can do as a TREC committee in helping implement the school justice partnership statewide in each county. We also had folks attend a fines and fees seminar. We found very informative, and we shared with our committee members. And in our August speaker will be Superior Court Judge Carla Archie, who will be giving us an overview on some of the work that was done with the Commission on Fairness and Equity, discussing how to reduce and eliminate disparate impact. So we've been having a pretty busy time at the Judicial Committee. The one thing that we really wanted to uplift to you all is that we have also been planning a reentry simulation event. We have a date set. It's set right now for September 8th. It will be held at NCCU. We will be releasing a registration link, a web page, as well as a flyer. We are asking TREC members to attend and to also reach out to folks that they know in their networks to also attend. We're also going to have a follow-up conversation by our co-chairs to also reiterate. So I don't want to take too much time talking about the reentry simulation, but I do want to very much implore folks to attend. We are looking to have roughly 60 to 80 people in attendance. We have volunteers. This is a cross-section of folks with the Department of Public Safety, the Department of Adult Corrections, as well as our TREC support from TREC. And so we really want to support the efforts that the reentry that's been done around reentry work in North Carolina, and in particular invite legislatures, both local and state, who can impact funding, to attend this reentry simulation, as well as judges, DAs, and assistant district attorneys to attend so that they may be able to immerse themselves in a simulation where they themselves can put themselves in the shoes of someone who is just now coming out of incarceration and trying to keep up with all the things that are required of them to maintain their probation and or their parole. So I invite you all to look out for that information that will be sent out by our TREC Executive Director, Brandy McCoy. And so please, folks, pay attention to the information that will be coming out, and spread the word about what is happening, so that we can at least have one time that we can all gather together and really immerse ourselves in the work of racial equity, reform, and criminal justice. So I think at this point, I'll pass it back to Justice Earls.
Right. Thank you so much for that report. And I do want to say a word about the reentry simulation, because the committee that's putting this together, I mean, it's a huge undertaking, and I'm just so impressed with all the work that they're doing. These reentry simulations are happening in communities around North Carolina. I only know about it because I found stuff on the internet. There was a newspaper article or some kind of media article about a Warren County reentry simulation, and the person, it was written by a person who participated in it. And so she talked about just sort of how it opened her eyes to so many things that she would have had no guess. And so part of the goal of the local communities is you're impacting, you're attracting, and your audience are the folks in social services programs, the local courts, the people who are serving the folks reentry and other just sort of daily services. You're impacting them. But what we have the potential to do as TREC, and we're also partnering with the U.S. Attorney's Office, so I think there's a real opportunity more at the state level to impact decision makers who fund the programs that we so strongly feel desperately need funding. People who make the laws about whether it's fines and fees or all sorts of other elements of the collateral consequences of convictions, for them to understand what it really means to come out of prison and have to navigate this incredibly complex web, or be on probation and have to do those things. So I think our goal is to get legislators, to get DAs, to get judges, and my sense is that a personal appeal. So this is so I guess our ask to TREC members is not simply like forward an email to your lists, but actually take the time to reach out to decision makers or opinion influencers in your community, and so maybe your state legislator, and say, we're doing this program, we think it's being done around the state and other communities, we'd love for you to experience it. That's the goal. And I'll tell you that I have asked the executive director of the Equal Access to Justice Commission, because they do driver's license restoration work. So they definitely see the overlap between serving low-income communities and criminal justice system debt, and so there's a possibility. I don't want to overpromise at all, but they might essentially have their meeting be part of them participating in this simulation. So I'm practicing what I preach. I'm working hard to get decision makers there, and we're trying to be obviously trying to be bipartisan. And there's really good reasons. Tara Callahan, who some of you may remember previously on the task force, may help us with that some. So that's my thing to add to your to-do list is to think about 2 or 3 people you know who might go to this if you reach out to them personally and ask them to attend. And with that, I will, does anyone have any questions? One final thing, let me say, make sure people understand that this is like a participatory workshop. Like, they're not going to be sitting in a room listening to a panel. Actually, they're going to be engaged. So we don't want people to show up and be surprised, but maybe that will also help more people want to come.
And just for clarification, I did put in the chat for folks not monitoring the chat, a copy of that article that I believe that Justice Earls was referring to. So you can get a greater understanding of what the reentry simulation is like. And I also did attend a reentry simulation that took place at Duke University a few months ago. And it was an experience that I would love for our TREC members as well as our legislatures, both local and state, to also experience, because we as gatekeepers and power holders, we should really understand the shoes of the people. We need to understand the lives that these folks are living, not just from an academic understanding, but from a real life perspective. So I look forward to seeing you all on September 8th with your, crew of people in hand, because I too have made a couple of asks already, and I'll continue to be making more asks. And I'll also put my email in the chat so that folks can reach out to me if you need if you have any additional questions or concerns around the upcoming event. But again, we're slated September 8th from 9 to 12, and folks will need to register.
And if you haven't seen Central's new student center, it's a lovely facility. It's really a nice place. And so I'm grateful to Dean Dawson and others who've helped facilitate us having it there. That brings us to the Legislative Committee, which they have been doing work. And Senator Mohammed refers to it as harm reduction, but I will let Caroline Caroline is going to give us more detail on that.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Senator Mohammed just texted me. He's stuck in court. It was very much his intention to be here this morning and was not able to. And just a quick update, as many of you know, our next project that we are working on is to do a second panel on the heels of the first bipartisan panel we did on driver's license restoration and fines and fees, is to do an additional panel discussion around juvenile life without parole. As many of you are aware, there were TREC recommendations around that. There was legislation around that previously. And so we want to raise this issue that does have bipartisan support again. Representative Maury and Senator Mohammed have been working to try to secure some elected officials on both sides of the aisle to be a part of that panel. I'm meeting with the Campaign for Fair Sentencing of Youth on Monday, again, to try to get some additional panelists and discussions. Additional panelists to participate. If anybody knows of folks, in particular, we're looking for electeds. Again, it could be somebody in the legislature or locally elected to participate. If you have any suggestions, please send those my way or to Senator Mohammed, because we're finalizing this agenda, hopefully for September. I think we all thought they were going to end session a little bit earlier, and the goal was for us to do this in August once session was over, but I think we see that session may be going a little bit longer. So it may be September before we get this, but the details will go out as soon as possible. And just real quick, last quick shout out to our partners in DAC regarding updates from the other committees. When it comes to restorative justice, just so you know, DAC, who of course was involved in the case that was presented to us, that we talked about being so impactful, they're developing a policy around this, and they've asked TREC to be a part of reviewing that policy, which we're excited to participate in. And also, they're helping us with volunteers for the reentry simulation, and they're helping kind of sponsor the reentry simulation. They're going to help us push the word out. If you know other folks that are interested in sponsoring the reentry simulation with us and pushing it out to their partners, or this bipartisan panel, please let me know, or Brandy know, or anybody else. And that's it, Madam Chair, unless you've got something else, or in case there are questions.
No, I will just say that our legislative members have been like, it's incredibly impressive to me. They can rattle off almost off the top of their head all the bills that they're following and the various criminal justice related impacts that they might have, and the efforts that they've been engaged in to work with the sponsors of those pieces of legislation. So if you want further information about what might be percolating where and what are the prospects of what as it relates to anything related to TREC, I know that Representative Morey or Senator Mohammed would be happy to give you a quick update. So just wanted to make that clear. And so that brings us to the local committee. Mike Hawkins.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Justice Earls. And I want to begin, and I'll be brief, but I want to begin personally to say that this meeting today, it really reinforces all the different things that TREC's doing, and it really makes you proud to be part of this, because there's so many different things that are going on, and they're interrelated with the different committees. And the thing that Nisha's doing, that's really exciting, and I look forward to that, the reentry conference. But I'm here to talk about the local committee, the things that we're doing. To begin with, I was going to name the members of the committee. I was writing them down this morning and the people who are working on it. But between the members of the task force and the members, the staff support and other people who are working, I came up with 18 names. And so I'm not gonna do 18 people. And it's 19 because Mr. Mr. Tate indicated an interest this morning to help. And so now he's officially a member of our committee now too. But there are a lot of people working, a lot of people doing a lot of work every month. And so briefly, we're in 4 areas. We've broken it into 4 subgroups, beginning with law enforcement, our law enforcement subgroup. This year, we've been looking at really 4 recommendations: number 2, number 6, number 9, and number 31. Particularly number 2, which involves crisis, not necessarily CIT, although the recommendation is CIT, but what our group has been looking at is the different components of the crisis issue. The staff chair, or the staff support person for that, Sherry Hunter, and I were talking the other day, and really there have been in those 4 categories, there have been quite a lot that's been done, and the 4 subgroup, or the 4 recommendations. And so really what we might be looking at is the second half of the year, maybe looking at some of the other recommendations and seeing if we can make some real progress in other recommendations related to law enforcement. We've got the Law Enforcement Advisory Group, which is scheduled to meet. That's a quarterly meeting. Scheduled to meet in August. Again, a group of about 15 people from around the state that provide us with advice. And we don't have a topic for that, I don't think, this month, this next month, but that will be coming up as well. A second subgroup is the local leaders subgroup. And when Sheriff Rahr was talking earlier about her emphasis on getting local leaders involved in this and the importance of local leaders being involved in this, that cheering you heard in the background was the members of the local committee, because that's something that we've been talking about and something that we're working on. largely through the hard work of Jasmine over the past couple of years, but we're continuing that with the League of Municipalities, with the County Commissioners Association, also with really drilling down to local boards, and Mayor Blakely's been a leader in that space in terms of working to get in front of, particularly in his home area in Henderson County and Western North Carolina here. So that's the local leaders group. We've also got the grassroots group that Ashby Ray is heading up as a staff support person. That's the area that Mr. Tate talked about quite extensively here earlier this morning. What we're working on with that, in a nutshell, is looking to identify and partner with local organizations, local agencies that deal in this space across North Carolina. We've been advised by 2 or 3 different people to narrow our focus on that, to maybe start regionally and then expand out into North Carolina. And with that advice, we decided to begin with the Triangle area, to identify agencies and organizations in the Triangle area that we might, stakeholder agencies that we might be able to partner with. I would mention Kerwin in particular, Kerwin Pittman, who is not officially a member of the local group, but he's done a ton of work on this, helping us with this, and continues to do a ton of work. So that's the final area that we've been working on that Sheriff Rohr talked about, is the whole question of culture, which is not a specific recommendation of TREC, but it came up this year in our subgroup, and really came up last year, I think, in some of the conversations with the law enforcement advisory group. The importance of culture in law enforcement agencies, but not just law enforcement agencies, other organizations and other agencies, and the conflict sometimes that occur between policy and culture. And so we thought it would be an interesting and useful thing to explore. We have done groundwork on that. The new thing that I would add to that right now is that we're going to reach out to the Wilson Center at Duke to get some assistance. Natalia's going to do that, which leads to the last thing that I would say is to mention that in every one of these 4 areas, we've had a staff support person, Ellen Spolar with the Department of Justice, who has done amazing work and really driven a large part of what we've done. Ellen left us this month. She's gone to take another position, and so she's no longer part of our team. But just wanted to mention her and all the work that she's done, and thank Natalia for being willing to come in and pick up some of the things that she's been doing. So with that, I'll give it back to you, Justice Earls.
Well, let me see if, does anyone have any questions? No. Well, thank you, Mike, for that report, and thank all of our committees for the incredible work. I want to let everyone know that we did commit to somehow do some formal, I don't know if we've done certificates, but some formal recognition and thanks to Ellen, because we all know the incredible work she's done since the beginning of the task force. And so that, I don't want you to think we're not, we will try to appropriately appreciate the incredible contribution she's made to our efforts. And so with that, I want to thank all of our current staff who also are doing amazing work, and thank all of you, and hand it over to Secretary Buffalo. There's a few things to wrap us up.
Thank you, Justice Earls. I'll entertain any new business at this time if we have any to discuss. And I'm Director McCoy. I'm not seeing anything in the chat on my end. Just checking.
Mr. Secretary, I do not either.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Okay, and we still don't have any public comments, correct?
No, sir, we do not.
Justice Earls, you want to add anything here?
Just to invite, if there's if anyone has anything in particular they want to make sure they see us do for our next full task force meeting, just invite feedback for that.
Thank you, ma'am. Well, thank everyone for taking your time out today. I think it was a very good meeting, productive meeting to hear from our presenters and to hear your feedbacks from the committee reports, as well as your hard work. This is great work, much needed work. I just want to say a special thank you to the DOJ staff, echo Justice Earl's sentiments with Ellen, and hopefully we can do some formal recognition on behalf of TREC for her. Also, I want to thank the DPS staff. I know sometimes I don't get around to say thank you to all of you with the task and other duties that you have. Thank you for supporting TREC, and especially thank you, Director McCoy, for keeping us in line and keeping us straight with TREC. We appreciate the phenomenal job that you're doing. Keep in mind that our next quarterly meeting is Friday, October the 27th. From 10 to noon. Director McCoy is going to send out some correspondence to you in regards to whether we want to determine if this will be virtual or in person. Hopefully it'll be in person, since that will be our last meeting of the year, and maybe we can do something formally to recognize those who have gone on to bigger and better places to do great things. So, Justice Earl, did you have anything? It looked like you were moving forward to the camera just a little bit. So.
No, you've covered it all.
Oh, okay. All right. Director McCoy, did I omit anything?
No, sir, you were great. Thank you.
Okay, well, without further ado, I say that this meeting is adjourned, and thank you all and have a great weekend.